So when we think about why the symptoms are happening, right? If we look at the relationship between stress and digestion, right? Which the autonomic nervous system controls both of those things, right? It does stress and it does digestion, and stress impacts digestion along with a whole host of other things. So if we look at, or if we accept that stress is really the biggest culprit when it comes to digestive symptoms, assuming that your diet is fairly healthy and well balanced, right? If we assume that, and you've been medically worked up and gotten a DGBI diagnosis from a physician, then I think it's safe to assume that stress is the biggest culprit of your symptoms. And yes, this is deductive reasoning, but there's a whole lot of evidence these days that supports this. It's not a real leap to think this way.
Hey there, and welcome to Heal with Grace. I'm your host, Grace Decker, and I'm a holistic licensed therapist and nervous system coach who believes that the chronic and often unseen symptoms you're living with are a sign of something deeper going on, a sign that your nervous system needs attention. In each episode, I'll share the science behind the most common chronic health disorders, plus holistic health tips using mental, physical, and spiritual practices. You'll hear what I've learned in my journey and the true stories from our trusted guests, so you can feel less alone in your experience and give yourself grace no matter what you're going through. So without further ado, settle in and get cozy. It's time to heal with Grace.
Hi, Jennifer. Thank you so much for coming on the Heal with Grace podcast. I am excited for you to be here.
Thank you, Grace, for inviting me to be here. I'm looking forward to having this conversation.
Yeah. Let's go ahead and jump right in. I really want to understand your story of how you became a gastropsychologist. That's super interesting. And I know many people have not heard of that. And it's been a long time, right? It's not just something new. You formulated this a while ago. So,
That's right.
yeah. Why don't you share a little bit of your story with us?
Okay. So I didn't set out to become a gastropsychologist or a psychologist that focuses on gut symptoms. This is something that I sort of fell into first through personal experience. I was diagnosed with IBS as a teenager, and I had a really progressive gastroenterologist that very quickly referred me on to a psychologist. And I waited a year to seek treatment from the psychologist because it felt really stigmatizing. But I got so desperate, I had to. And back then they weren't prescribing a lot of things, especially to kids. So they're really, it's not like they were prescribing this and prescribing that. And then I was trying these different meds over time. He very quickly said, there's really nothing more I can do for you. And that didn't feel bad. That felt like he was very caring. He listened well. So I felt heard, I felt cared for. And so when he said, there's genuinely nothing I can do for you, it was a little disappointing, but didn't feel dismissive, which was important. So he gave me this referral. Then I sat on it for a year. By the end of that year, my symptoms were so acute and I was so desperate for relief. I had no other options but to reach out to the psychologist, right? So it was like the logical next step. I didn't really have to think so hard about it. I started talking to this psychologist once a week in person. I knew nothing about the type of psychologist she was or anything. I'm still a teenager and, I go in once a week for an hour and I talk never about my GI symptoms. I never talked about my GI symptoms. I just talked about my life, my stress, the dramas of the week, my friends, whatever. And lo and behold, after 1 year of just that, nothing different. And if anything, worse stress in my life, because now I was getting closer to, like, my grades mattered more. I was getting closer to figuring out what college I was going to apply to, all that. After the end of that year, I was, I'd say, about 50% better. So all of my acute symptoms that caused me to miss school, caused me not to be able to eat, made me feel terrible, and I was in so much pain. All of those terrible symptoms went away. And so I was able to function in my life. So I graduated high school and I was just very acutely aware of the connection between the mind and body. Like, is it possible that I could get so much better from just talking to a psychologist once a week about my life? So that was my question, my big question. That then later led me to make certain choices as it came
Mm,
to studying psychology. So I was going to probably become a psychologist anyway, but because I'd had that experience, the
mm,
graduate program I chose was a different graduate program than the one I would have chose otherwise. And I ended up having um, an interesting experience in graduate school. As a result, it was important to me to pick a school where I could ask the question that I wanted to know. How did this happen? And I could pursue studies that would help me to understand that. And so as I did that, I started learning about a lot of different mind body modalities, right? Like I was expected to meditate every day at the beginning of every class. I was expected to do martial arts and yoga and have certain conversations and engage in mindful communication, mindful conversation. Self-compassion was something we talked about. I mean, this is way before Madonna popularized yoga and way before mindfulness was a word that most people had heard of.
mm,
So all of those things ended up making a difference. My system started calming down. My brain started calming down. I didn't even realize how anxious I was until I really understood meditation. And then I started really being able to see how anxious my mind really was. So I started working on that and calming down. And I was in a community of really wonderful people that were very supportive and kind and loving and affectionate. And that all made a difference. And so by the time I got out of graduate school, before graduate school, I still had some symptoms that happened every so often. Not acute, but they happened. And by the time I graduated, pretty much all those symptoms had gone away. And then I started realizing certain fears that I still had, certain
mm.
things I was avoiding. And I started unraveling those one at a time when they would show up. And then I got to the point where I was fully recovered. And that was about the time I um, was already working as a psychotherapist for, like getting my hours in order to get licensed. And I needed to find clients. And I was responsible for getting my own clients. So that means I had to go out and pound the pavement and attract people to my practice. And, I happened to simultaneously be working part time at an advertising agency. And they said, you need a
Mm.
niche. You need a niche. So I was talking to my mom one day and she says, well, you should work with people who have IBS. And I said, no, no, no. That's the last thing I want to do. I don't want to work with people with IBS because if I start hearing them talk about
Mm.
their stories, right, they start telling me about their IBS symptoms, that might trigger my own symptoms again, which is completely irrational because I had not had symptoms in years. So then it was like kind of the last piece for me. I was like, wow, I'm avoiding exposure to
Mm.
patients or to people's stories because I'm afraid. And it's totally irrational for me to think that I could suddenly have symptoms just from being there with someone who had symptoms. So that was it. I unraveled that and it took me like just days. And then I thought, okay, I'm ready. So it wasn't even my idea, is my point. I never thought about doing that. Yeah.
Similar to me, actually, never in a million years thought I would be doing what I do.
Really?
Yeah, no, I went into school because I wanted to be a teen girl therapist because that's
Oh.
how I was helped as a teen.
Oh.
And that was my thing. I was like, "I'm gonna be
Yeah.
a teen girl therapist," and I went in a totally different direction. Not totally different, but just yeah, not that way. So I'm curious, have you had symptoms since working in this specialty? Sometimes we talk about that doesn't
Yeah.
solve, taking on
Yeah.
fine symptoms. I'm just
Yeah.
yeah.
No, digestive symptoms are sort of interesting because, like, digestive symptoms is like even normal includes certain digestive symptoms sometimes, right? I mean, we get like indigestion, and sometimes
True.
if we don't eat a particular way or drink or we travel, we get constipated, So, I mean, yeah, I still have like, the normal things that happen. And from time to time, I mean, we're talking once in a blue moon, I have something really bad happens, and it's always because of a massive stressor.
Uh,
But the thing is that I now know that that's what's going on, and I know how to get myself out of it really quickly. So it's not even diagnosable as a
Mm.
disorder of gut brain interaction because it doesn't go on long enough to actually meet these criteria.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Okay, so then how do you explain what did you essentially find out in your studies and when you went to search? How do you explain the relationship between the gut, the brain, and the nervous system?
Well, I think I like to make things as simple as possible. I think it's important to really recognize that the whole purpose of the brain is to ensure our survival.
Mm.
Okay, so that's like the primary job of the brain. And pretty much everything it does is in service of our survival,
Mm.
right? Keeping us safe and out of harm's way, right? When the brain and when the nervous system is really, tasked with our survival, and the brain is what does a lot of the, perceiving of danger to ensure that we know when it's time to do certain things, right? And so when it's time to do stress, then the brain signals our autonomic nervous system to start doing stress, right? And the autonomic nervous system not only does stress, but it does digestion, right?
Mm.
And so right there, like when we think about the autonomic nervous system, first of all, we don't consciously control our autonomic nervous system. It does these things, it does stress and it does digestion without needing our conscious control, which is really good because we would be bogged down if we had to consciously decide to do stress or to do digestion. We would be doing that like all day. We wouldn't have enough, we wouldn't be able to work. So, our autonomic nervous system does stress, does digestion, and does it without needing our conscious control.
Mm.
So, if we're having digestive symptoms, right,
Mhm.
and we don't control digestion, that's a real conundrum,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So the way I think about this is, we are not in the driver's seat of digestion. Right? We want to be, you want to control your digestive symptoms, right?
Mhm.
But you don't actually control your digestion. So
Mm.
you're not in the driver's seat. And that's really frustrating. And for most people, when you have digestive symptoms, you feel like you're in the back seat of the car, right? With no control whatsoever, totally out of control. And it's extremely stressful, right? So the goal is not to get in the driver's seat because that's not really the way this works, right?
Okay.
Nobody's in the driver's seat of their autonomic nervous system.
Mm. Yeah.
So the best we can do is get in the front passenger seat. And from there, we have a lot more at our fingertips,
Yeah.
right? We can control the music, we can control the volume, we can control the temperature of the car. We can talk to the driver. We have a lot of influence, right? And that's essentially what we want to do. So we want to sort of not just feel like a victim in the back seat and go into panic mode, but we want to be able to, using a lot of self talk and self compassion and acceptance strategies, right? We have to accept, okay, we're in the car. This is happening. The
Mhm.
car is going places we don't really want to go, right? And yet, here we are to breathe. Let's figure out how we're going to address this situation, right? It's kind of like the way a lot of people respond to digestive symptoms quite automatically is almost like the way a child, like a young child, reacts when they have to do something they don't want to do. They have a tantrum,
Mm.
right?
Mhm.
And, it's kind of the way our brain works when we really don't want to have symptoms in this moment or at all. And then they start happening,
Mhm.
right? A little bit of a tantrum. And it's justified. It's totally understandable for you to have feelings about this. And yet, if we just stay in that high stress tantrum state, we're not able to really effectively deal with the situation at hand. We don't deal with things well, unless it's an emergency or a crisis. We don't really want to be in crisis mode.
Right.
Right? We want to be calm and centered so we can think mindfully, logically, rationally about what's happening and to understand the situation clearly so we're not overreacting and then allow ourselves to just, process our feelings and then make sense of it all and make a plan.
What are some of the
Mhm.
tools and skills that we can do as the passenger in the passenger seat?
I think if we're in the passenger seat, we have to think about like where we are in a given moment, right?
Mm.
What's happening right now in this moment? right? Because the way that we respond is not really about what seat that we're in. It's more what's happening in this moment and what's the most effective choice I can make to
Mm,
help bring about the outcome I'm looking for.
mhm, mhm,
So there's lots of different moments that can play out, and those can look a little bit different, right? Like I'm in the grips of acute symptoms versus I'm actually having a good day. But having a good day creates some problems too for people, right? Because when you have a good day, but you're not used to having a good day, sometimes the mind has learned to focus on the symptoms so much or the place in our body where we experience the symptoms that we can be so fixated on the problem and we're not actually enjoying our good day.
mm,
And in fact, it can be even a self-fulfilling prophecy of I'm so worried about having symptoms later. I'm predicting that I'm going to have symptoms later, which is what our minds do. They use predictive processing. So it's really normal for the brain to do that. And yet it's not helpful when you're actually having a good day and you can't even focus on the goodness that's happening in the here and now.
yeah, yeah. So what I'm hearing is working with fear and anxiety around the body and symptoms are what could or could not happen, may or may not happen.
That is a whole set of strategies.
Yeah.
Yes. But that plays out, in a lot of different ways.
Mm,
Fear. So when we think about why the symptoms are happening, right? If we look at um, the relationship between stress and digestion,
mm,
right? Which the autonomic nervous system controls
yeah.
both of those things, right? It does stress and it does digestion. And stress impacts digestion along with a whole host of other things. So if we look at, or if we accept that stress is really the biggest culprit when it comes to digestive symptoms, assuming that your diet is fairly healthy and well balanced, if we assume that and you've been medically worked up and gotten a DGBI diagnosis from a physician,
Mm,
then I think it's safe to assume that stress is the biggest culprit of your
mm,
symptoms. And yes, this is deductive reasoning, but there's a whole lot of evidence these days that supports this. It's not a real leap to
yeah.
think this way. And the reason why I think we need to start thinking this way and treating for stress or chronic stress really is that um, basically there's no reason not to treat for chronic stress because what's the worst that happens? There's no side effects for treating chronic stress. And what is the downside, right? I mean, it's only upside. So if you're reducing stress, how is that not going to benefit you?
Right.
Right. So then the question becomes, how do we reduce stress? How do we come out of this pattern of chronic stress that's been at play for a while? And there's a whole lot of ways that we do this. And then there's some commonalities or things that are just true across a wide range of people.
That's actually what I was going to ask you next is do you see there's two parts to my question. One, do you see a theme with people that are coming in your door with chronic digestive symptoms, IBS? I don't know if there is or not. I'm just curious. And what are some of those themes that help the majority?
Yeah. Well, I think
Yeah.
one of the themes is when you have chronic stress, most often people are suffering from some form of anxiety, whether it's diagnosed or
Cool.
not.
Yeah.
Right. So I think sometimes anxiety is not necessarily diagnosed because if you're not complaining about what you experience day in and day out, then you're not going to seek care for it and you're not going to get diagnosed. So that's one reason. Another reason is we live in a very fast paced society. And so if you're moving fast, talking fast, going fast, go, 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 do all the time, there's so much positive reinforcement for that in our culture
Mhm.
that it's really hard to see that as, maybe some form of anxiety. Right.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of people manage symptoms of anxiety that is not problematic, really. Like in their day to day lives, it's not necessarily problematic, but it becomes problematic when you're sort of living at the top of your window of tolerance or your zone of regulation, right? Like everybody has their max capacity of stress that they can handle, right? Stress or activation or stimulation that they can handle before their nervous system sort of reaches its peak, right? And then once you surpass that capacity, then you start seeing symptoms, whether it's overwhelm or panic attacks or just way too much anxiety or crashing out in depression or fatigue. Or so if we're living hard and fast for too long, uh, we're setting our nervous system up to not be able to handle much more.
Right.
And then if a traumatic experience happens on top of that, this is like a common scenario. Type A person, lives hard and fast, go, 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 do, do, do. They don't really have a habit of slowing down or practicing more contemplative things or paying attention to how they feel and processing their emotions, all kinds of habits. And then something truly traumatic happens and they don't have the bandwidth to deal with it very well. I mean, something traumatic, even for the best of us, even if we have all these skills that help us to be more resilient and to have greater capacity, even if we had all those skills, sometimes a traumatic event can blow us out of the water. But when we have more capacity, we have greater ability to come out of that chronic stress that happens as a result of trauma easier. So we have more bandwidth to reach out to people or to maybe do some of the things, to engage in some of the practices, or to do some of the journaling or trauma processing or whatever we need to do. We have a little more capacity for that. And we maybe have the built-in resources and skill set to be able to do those things effectively so that we can navigate out, right? And back to a calmer state of being.
I want to highlight what you mentioned. We do live fast, do a lot, and you get rewarded very easily for that. And I often find, I don't know if you find this too, but I often find that people will acknowledge a little bit of stress or acknowledge maybe something here or there. But overall, it might just be so normal that they're like, well, how could I be this stressed to have these symptoms?
Exactly.
But it's just become part of the norm.
That's right. That's it. That's it. It's like, it's hard to recognize something when that's been the way you've been living for a long time or your whole life, right? It's hard to see something as a problem if it's been that way your whole life. That's just normal.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, like I'm a perfectionist, but it's hard to see yourself as a perfectionist. It's hard to see yourself as a people pleaser if that's just kind of what you do. It's not a change. It's not, you don't go into that mode. It's part of your overall integrated thought process and approach.
Exactly. Which is why things like this, like podcasts and information, and it's helpful for people to hear, or someone might hear it and send it to someone, because we can't see everything about ourselves. We can't understand the dynamics that happen that contribute to the stress that then contributes to our bodies.
Yeah. Yeah. So just to sum it up though,
Yeah.
like the things that contribute are sometimes lifelong habits, lifelong strategies, lifelong patterns of thinking, of doing, of feeling or not feeling. Serve a valuable or helpful purpose when these strategies or behaviors came into being, right? When they started being used. They were helpful, effective, maybe a matter of survival. And as they become habitual, as one grows up and does different things and exposes themselves to different situations, different people, different stimuli, they become rigid, right? And one of the keys to health is flexibility. I mean, we're seeing this right now politically in a lot of ways, but we see this with any organization that if they don't know how to adapt to change, because change is the way. Right? They don't know how to adapt to change. They're not going to survive, right? And we as human beings are designed to adapt pretty well. So well that we adapt to circumstances without even consciously knowing that that's what our brain's doing. And that's why it's hard to recognize stress and trauma as easily as I think would be helpful in treating DGBIs.
Yeah. And I meant to ask you this earlier. Can you explain DGBIs just for someone who doesn't understand that?
So a DGBI stands for disorder of gut-brain interaction. It's a category of digestive disorders that includes irritable bowel syndrome, chronic constipation, cyclic vomiting syndrome, chronic dyspepsia, and some others. And it's basically the new name that's given to functional gastrointestinal disorders, right? And it's just a category of digestive disorders. And every medical specialty has its category of what are called functional medical disorders or functional medical problems. And I think, certain people would call those mind body problems or neuroplastic conditions, all terms that mean the same thing, medical or physiological problems that aren't attributable to disease or structural dysfunction or injury.
Okay. Yeah, that's helpful. And so these terms can be more labels, syndromes that you get after going through medical testing and ruling out other things that could be more structural. Is that right?
Right.
I want to back up to emotions, working
Mhm.
with understanding ourselves, understanding emotional regulation and processing them as obviously, and you mentioned this is a big part of this. How do you explain how either stuck emotions or non-processed emotions or emotions at all, how does that contribute to a stressed body?
Okay.
Yeah.
So we have emotions all the time as human beings. It is
Mhm.
totally normal and natural to be emotional and to have emotions. We don't always get that memo. In our families,
Very true.
like in our culture, in society, as Americans, I don't think that
Mhm.
we are trained very well to see ourselves as normal human beings when we have an emotion show up.
Mhm.
And so emotions are not like totally welcome.
Yep.
They're not welcome in the business world. They're not welcome in a lot
Mhm.
of different contexts. And so when that's sort of the context, right? And we're growing up in families who also don't learn how to welcome their own emotions
Mm.
into the fold, right? Then you learn very early that I'm not supposed to have emotions or I'm not supposed to talk about my emotions. I'm not supposed to share them. I'm not supposed to cry, whatever
Yeah.
the assumption is. And that assumption is not necessarily wrong, right? It's based on what you pick up on or in the experiences you have, whether explicitly your parent tells you, you can't talk about that here, or, I'm not going to talk about it, whatever it is, or whether oftentimes it's more implicit. It's just a sense that I don't feel safe or I don't feel comfortable opening up and showing vulnerability, crying, or talking about how I'm really feeling.
Mm.
Right. And so when we learn at such a young age that it's not okay to share how we really feel in one situation or multiple situations, right? Or worse, we get punished or slammed or something
Mm.
really terrible happens when we do open up, then our brain sees that as a threat. It's a threat to my sense of safety or my security or even my life.
Mhm.
God forbid, for me to open up and start sharing my emotion or to even recognize or to cry or whatever it is, right? And so if we learn really young that we can't have that emotion come up and out in some
Mhm.
way,
Mhm.
to be seen,
Mm.
right? To be experienced inside and or to be seen by somebody else,
Yeah.
right? If we learn that that's not safe, then our brain is going to try to keep that from happening. It's going to keep
Mhm.
that out of consciousness. And how far out of consciousness depends on what you've experienced, how your brain responds to those experiences,
Mhm.
and what the specific emotion is. For example, some people have anger go underground, but other emotions are welcome. And there's so many different scenarios that can play out can um, that can result in emotions being experienced by different people in different ways, right? But the bottom line is if your brain does not feel safe enough to allow feelings to be felt, experienced inside, and then to be shared in some way, so we don't just have to hold it in or express, then our brain has to use its resources to keep that stuff out of consciousness and to keep it in, right?
Mhm.
And that is not a one time deal. It's not like your brain goes, okay, we need to put a little effort into this for just a moment and then we're good. We can just like stop putting effort or work into that. It's 24/7. If something has to stay out of your consciousness, your brain has to work at that all the time to keep it out, to keep you from having to look at it, having to feel it, having to deal with it.
That's a really helpful part that I'm glad that you brought up the idea that your brain's working so hard to keep that away, because I haven't heard that explained in that way very often, and this is why I asked. I talk about emotions on here, we've discussed it, but it is the one thing I find with clients in the mind body space with symptoms and a lot of digestive symptoms where they're doing the brain training, they're learning about fear and anxiety, and this emotions piece is kind of that thing that maybe not probably not consciously, maybe, but
Mhm.
unconsciously we're not working with or looking at or feeling, right? And so I love to have people explain it in different ways. So maybe it'll, someone will take it in a different way and understand, oh, okay, and get the courage to feel a little bit more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so important to understand that part of how we know we're alive as humans is we feel things. And I mean, when you think about what depression is like a depressing, right? A pressing down on our life force, right? And that's why we feel we just like there's no affect. We're like we go flat. So when we're alive, we feel. And when you think about like what passion is, right? It's like that aliveness to the nth degree because of something or someone that ignites, makes us feel really alive, right? So emotions are part of our aliveness.
Uh,
And it's really important for us to retrain ourselves to recognize that, first of all, to just recognize in a blanket way that we have emotions all the time and to have that be okay, to learn how to develop maybe a different type of relationship with our emotional lives and our inner selves
yeah.
so that we create a safe space for our emotions to exist,
Yeah.
right? And then we need to work maybe on finding safe spaces in our external world, right, with other people, so that we can have our feelings not just be recognized by us, but also to be shared, to be talked about, to be expressed, and to work with them in ways that might be important in order for us to recover from something painful or sad or traumatic or intense.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. That's really helpful. And
Yeah.
you've
You're
really
welcome.
painted a good picture around understanding how stress and emotions affect the autonomic nervous system, which we don't have control over, right? And that
Mm.
we can help either direct or shift, especially being that passenger in the car. I love that analogy. Is there anything else around what we've talked about that feels like it needs to be summed up or you want to share more on?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yes. So, first of all, when a doctor does a full medical workup and tells you that you have IBS or some other disorder of gut brain interaction or chronic pain or some other condition, when they've assessed your body and
Mm,
they've told you that they don't find anything, that's really good news. You don't want them to find anything. That means that there's probably some kind of, structural dysfunction, which is a much bigger deal, right?
yeah.
So when you have a disorder of gut brain interaction, it's a software problem, not a hardware problem,
Yeah.
right? And that's actually really good news. And you might not see it that way, but that is something to work towards, right? What part of your brain, what part of you, what feelings are you having in response to hearing that this is good news? And be curious about that response. That brings insight. That might tell you what needs to happen in order for you to find some ease in this situation. So that can be a start.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. All right. Two, your brain and body are never working against you.
Thank you for saying that.
Right? They're always working in service of you staying alive and safe, right? Three, your brain and body, they know how to heal and recover from all kinds of things. They do it all the time. When you have an injury, they know how to help the body to heal. When you have a cut, you don't have to tell your brain and body how to heal and recover from that. Right? You do need to treat the wound to make sure you don't get an infection, But once you treat the wound, or maybe you keep treating it, but your body is automatically going to do the healing,
Yeah.
right? On its own time clock. You don't get to say, okay, can you heal this in 5 minutes for me, please? Some people do that with their digestive symptoms. They're like, well, I can't have, from this day to that day because I've got this other thing going on. Then they get really, really frustrated when the symptoms happen and they feel
Wow.
a lot of pressure. Like, okay, I got to get this fixed by this date.
Yeah.
And guess what? That creates more stress.
Yeah.
And I think that's the final thing I want to say is that the fix here is it's all about reducing stress. You might need to avoid certain things initially, but avoidance is really not going to cut it long term, right? So we can't just avoid everything and then everything's going to be great. We have to start deconstructing the things that we know. We have to start but with the things that we know are causing us stress and
Mm.
start deconstructing these, whatever they are, these stressors, little by little. Like we have to, first of all, we have to be willing to turn towards them and say, okay, yes, I am. We have to be willing to acknowledge, yes, this thing is causing me great stress. And if we're starting with what we know, then we can start to take a bite out of, stress and work towards the things that we don't know instead of banging our head against the wall trying to figure out what we don't know and what our brain is keeping out of consciousness. Brains are going to keep things out of consciousness until there's enough time and space
Mhm.
for that stuff to come forward, right? So we have to create the conditions under which the stuff that we don't know about, that the stuff that our brain's been keeping out of consciousness, we need to create enough time and space and safety for that material to start coming forward.
It's a great way of looking at it. We talk about learning how to create safety in the body, right, to reduce some fear and anxiety, but yeah, it's for allowing too. It's allowing that space and being able to work through what we need to work through or for that unconscious to come forward. So, yeah, that makes a
Right.
lot of sense. Right.
Right. And we do that by focusing on feeling good as
Yeah.
much as we can, right?
Yeah.
Because we're going to all feel much more at ease when we feel good, right?
Yeah. Beautiful. Okay. Thank you so much. This is a
You're
great
welcome.
conversation because you explained it easily and simply, like you mentioned in the beginning. So I think that it's a way for people to grab onto it and start to make some connections for themselves. So thank
I
you.
hope so.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what we can do, right? Share and help and try to say it in a different way, maybe at some point in time, because we all hear
Yeah.
things differently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I hope this speaks to people and helps people to not get lost in all of these different, more complicated processes or get bogged down in
Mhm.
flooding themselves with data, information. I think it's simpler if we just start slowing down and paying attention to the parts of ourselves that haven't really gotten our attention.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'll
Yeah.
end with repeating what you said that if you have heard from a doctor that you have one of these syndromes, it can be a good thing, even if it feels scary at first because you don't know. But if you're listening to this, it can be a good thing and it can be helped. So, yeah,
Yeah. It's good news.
exactly.
It's good news that you don't have a disease or a
Yeah,
structural dysfunction.
for
Yeah,
sure.
that your body is in fine working order and that the problem is a software problem. That is a good problem to have in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, for sure. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you for having me, Grace.
You are welcome. And we will make sure to link your links below, but do you want to share how people can find you?
Yes, people can find me at Don't Hate Your Guts on YouTube or don'thateyourguts.com for a free ebook and 2 different courses that I have available.
Amazing. I love the webpage, the website, the handle. That's great. Don't hate your gut.
Thank you.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Thank you. And we will see you next time on the Heal with Grace podcast.